Erikson is really hitting me in the post-it note budget, but I'm happy for it. Hey everybody, today we are doing spoiler-free review of Dust of Dreams, the 9th tale in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. Now, I say spoiler-free, but of course I always want to warn people. There is going to be some minor spoilers just in basic, like who survives, because I have to talk about characters and that sort of thing. So if you really want no spoilers at all, maybe don't watch this video, but I'll try to keep the spoilers definitely to a minimum, even of the other books in the Malazan world. Now, let's get to Dust of Dreams. At the end of Reaper's Gale, we had this really fun conflation of the story that we've been following in Lether with the Bone Hunters, as they all came together at the capital city to overtake the Tisti-Idur Empire. Now, finally, after Toll the Hounds took us all the way back to Genebacus, we are now seeing the outcome of that. What are the Bone Hunters going to do now that they are on this island and they have repaid the vengeance that they swore against this foreign empire? In fact, it seems like the overall plot, at least for the Bone Hunters, has sort of lost its way. And so it's very interesting at the beginning of the book to find out what the next chapter is for that segment of the overall Malazan story. My overall thoughts on Dust of Dreams is, despite being shorter than Toll the Hounds, it feels a little longer because it doesn't move as quickly as Toll the Hounds does. It suffers in a lot of overall lists from this syndrome, especially because, for those of you who don't know, Dust of Dreams and the last book, The Crippled God, really were written by Erikson as a single work, but were divided up for publication reasons. So Dust of Dreams really feels like that it's a whole lot of setup and just a little bit of payoff. And I'm guessing that Crippled God is going to be a whole lot of payoff, and that is all going to come down to Dust of Dreams. So just keep that in mind. I'm going to say some negative things about this, but all the positive things that are able to be said about the Crippled God, the last book in the Malazan series, is really because of the heavy lifting Dust of Dreams does. It also is the most reflective, and this is the positive of the fact that it is part one of a part two book, is that it takes its time. And it especially takes its time on the overall themes of the Malazan series. The inability of humans to learn from history's mistakes, a plea for compassion and to look past one's own self to the suffering and the needs of others, to especially put the good and well-being of children and future generations ahead of your own temporal comfort, evils of empires, and expansive views and self-importance, looking at yourself and your own tribe. There's a lot of reflection on those themes in Dust of Dreams. I think that makes it a very solid book, even though perhaps at times it seems a bit meandering. That said, Dust of Dreams is also the most brutal book so far in the Malazan universe. I literally, at one point, and if you've read the book, you probably can guess the point of the book I'm talking about, I had to put the book down, I had to go on a walk and just clear my mind because it was so horrible, the things that were happening. And as usual with Erikson, it's not glorified, it's not told in any sort of way to relish the violence, but that doesn't make it any less terrible. And it certainly is done for a point. But it's just so hard to read. So keep that in mind as you're reading Dust of Dreams. There are some parts that are just brutal, really hard, and I would say, I think so far, the hardest in the entire series. Now let's give a little bit more background on the plot overall. I already mentioned the Bone Hunters is going to be a major plot, so you're following Fiddler. Tavor, a little bit, as usual in the book so far. You don't really get in Tavor's head, you just see what she is doing from a distance. You also do get a little bit of King Tehol and Mael, or Bug, but again, as usual with Erikson, once a beloved character reaches a certain level of power or influence, we stop getting inside their head as much. So we have a few Tehol back and forths and seeing what he's thinking, but not very many. In fact, we get much more of Bug or Mael in this book than we get of Tehol. It's very much what happens with Ganos Perrin. As soon as he becomes master of the deck, we don't really get inside of his head that much. Same thing happens with Tehol. Once he reaches sort of the pinnacle as king, we're not in his head as much. And that's just the unique feature of how Erikson likes to write his Malazan Tales. New in this book, we're going to follow Onos Tulan and the Barghast, especially the white-faced Barghast, as they continue to roam and look for their war on the continent of Lether. We last saw them a couple books ago, sort of briefly at the end of Red Mask's rebellion. It's a great plot because we love Tulan and we really believe in him and have been with him for a long time now, but we're not sure about the white-faced Barghast as a group. We don't know a lot about them or their motivations. So we're invested in this leader, but the people themselves we're not sure of. And that's a feeling that you're going to keep throughout Dust of Dreams. And that story really develops, I think, the fastest of all of these stories. A third storyline, and this is sort of a subplot, I guess, to the Bone Hunters since they're technically part of the full unit, but we really get inside the Parish Grey Swords a lot more than we do in previous books. So it's almost like a whole new group of characters that we get to know. And I really appreciate that plot. Actually surprising because it's so many new people so late in the game. Love what happens there. I don't want to give anything away, but they're dealing with the Bolkandu Kingdom, which is a border kingdom to the Lether Empire, sort of a smaller kingdom that's full of tricksters and plotsters, and it's very interesting to see the Grey Swords deal with them. I think that storyline is very entertaining. The fourth sort of major storyline, I'm just lumping in a lot of characters to what I'm calling wanderers. There are a lot of people that are wandering the wastelands in this book. And they're not all together. There's this group of people called the Snake, which is a bunch of children who are fleeing from something. We don't really know exactly what. There's Taxilian and a couple other spirits that are wandering around that seem to be just exiles that are also followed around by a ghost, and we don't know the identity of that ghost. There's also a couple random groups of people or spirits that are just in the wastelands. And this plot line develops and does have a payoff, but I actually do think that these different groups are really what slow the pace down in Dust of Dreams and are sometimes frustrating that you're stuck reading this when you want to be reading about what's happening in the Lether Empire with the Bone Hunters. So I think this is the weakest storyline. Another weak storyline is, in my opinion, the Sheikh, as they are wandering in a warren looking for Karkanos, the fallen city of the Tisti-Andi. I have never been super invested in Twilight or The Watch or really anyone that we're watching from those perspectives. So for me, that was kind of a storyline to get through. To be honest, even to the end of the book, I wasn't that interested in what was happening there compared to what was happening elsewhere. So I thought that really slowed down the book and the pace as well. And I wanted to read a quote kind of mid-book that is attributed to King Tehol, but I think it is Erikson very purposely speaking to the reader about Dust of Dreams. He actually puts a note at the beginning letting us know that Dust of Dreams is sort of the first part of a two-parter that's going to end with the crippled god, so he does warn you right away. But I think actually it's interesting. I'm pretty sure this is him putting in the narrative his thought about bringing the Malazan Book of the Fallen to a close. This is at the very end of chapter 11. King Tehol says, "This seems a messy conclusion to things, doesn't it? Little that amuses, even less that entertains. You must know I prefer to leap from one delightful absurdity to another. My last gesture on the Malazan stage should have been the highest of dramas, is my feeling. Instead, I taste something very much like ashes in my mouth, and that is most unpleasant." I think that definitely describes Dust of Dreams as far as it is bringing it to a conclusion, but as I said, it's very brutal at times, and the tale feels a little dry. And I think it's very interesting that the ashes imagery comes back because, of course, that famous quote from Gardens of the Moon that encapsulates the whole series also talks about dry ashes turning cold. I'll talk more about that in my spoiler discussion, so come back after you've read the book to see my fuller thoughts on that. I mentioned earlier that I really enjoyed how this book sits in its themes and really brings to the forefront some of the philosophy and again, larger themes that are behind the Malazan plot as a whole. I thought I would give you a good illustration of this. When I'm reading books and something particularly jumps out at me or makes me think or makes me reflect on things, I like to just put a little post-it note in the book so I can come back after I finish the book and again reflect on that thought. Normally in a epic fantasy series, I'm doing that maybe 2 to 3 times in a book. If it's a really great book that has some really profound themes, maybe like up to 10 post-it notes. This is my Dust of Dreams copy. There must be close to 20 post-it notes here of various sizes. There's just so much good stuff in this writing. Dust of Dreams has some amazing sequences and some amazing philosophical discussions in it. And really challenges the reader. I think the reader who's really paying attention, it challenges your perception of yourself. It should challenge your perception of the tribe or country that you're a part of. It should challenge your viewpoint of humanity and how it deals with the earth. It should challenge your view of God and supernaturalism. I really think this is a challenging series, which is why I love it so much. And Dust of Dreams does not pull punches in that regard. And I haven't mentioned to this point, but the last 150 to 200 pages, while the overall pace is very slow, once you get to the end, it's just non-stop pace. Page turn, page turn, page turn. In fact, I had to stay up late into the night or early in the morning, depending on how you want to say it, to finish this book, because I just could not stop once I reached a certain point. So just know it is going to pick up speed, and it is going to end with a great climax. I also haven't mentioned there's a lot more than previous about the Kachin Shamal, which I think is just a very cool adding to the mythology of the world as a whole. So again, overall, Dust of Dreams is kind of a weird mismatch of a lot of things. First off, there are some really great moments, and the plot overall I think is very interesting because the Lether Empire obviously is, or the Lether continent is going to be where we see the conclusion to this whole series. So it's really setting that up. You get to see a lot of your favorite characters like Fiddler, like Tavor, like Tehol, like Bug, or Mael. You get a lot of that really good, interesting stuff. But it also is a slower pace because it's setting up that ending. So you're really going through a lot of setup. I think if you're ready for that, it's not so bad, but if you're not, it can really feel like it's dragging. Also, there are some of the most brutal moments in the entire Malazan series in this book, and that's just hard. No matter what kind of reader, how steely your conscience is, this is going to be a tough book, and there's going to be moments that are going to be tough to read. There are some weaker storylines, there are some weaker characters, I think, in this novel, but I'm guessing and I'm trusting Erikson that those are important characters, and even some of them that were weaker early on develop into a very interesting end. It's a hard book to talk about without talking about spoilers, so I'm going to end the review here just by saying this book really sets up the Crippled God for a great finale to the Malazan series, and it's willing to allow itself to suffer for the greater good, I think, of the series overall. And so I'm going to give it a higher grade than maybe you would think. As I'm talking about this, I'm giving it an 8 out of 10. Highly recommend. Obviously, if you've made it this far in the series, there's no way you're not going to read Dust of Dreams, so I wanted to give you sort of what to expect, but an 8 out of 10. Great book. Thank you so much for listening to this spoiler-free review of Dust of Dreams. Leave your thoughts about the book in the comments below. Please no spoilers. And if it's your first time through, maybe tell me what you are expecting as you start the Crippled God, final tale in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. Subscribe to our page. Thank you so much. First in, last out.